What's up, folks? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be doing something interesting. Now, agents have been in a hype for a while now because of the powerful capabilities and the potential they carry to automate all sorts of tasks for us in a computer, as well as to perform things like mathematical reasoning, scientific discovery, research and reports, browse the internet, all sorts of stuff. So I find agents quite fascinating. And the thing is, it's kind of hard sometimes when you have a bunch of frameworks to choose from to build these agents. It's difficult to understand which one to use. And I found that one cool way to solve this issue is to try to implement agents yourself first, just using a large language model and nothing else, and see how difficult it is to give that model the ability to perform actions in the real world. And we're going to be trying to do that today. And then we're going to see what kind of problems are fixed by using something like OpenAI function calling, which, if you don't know what it is, there's a link in the description. Essentially, it's it's an API from OpenAI that gives you the ability to connect models like ChatGPT to functions and tools that do stuff in the real world. And all you have to do is set up a little JSON schema that explains to the model how that function should be called. And then the model figures out how to prepare the inputs for that function given some problem that's given in the prompt for the model. Don't worry if you don't understand all of that, because we're going to go through examples in this notebook. Finally, I want to build simple agents using LangChain, which is a framework for developing complex and interesting LLM-based applications. And I think LangChain is kind of cool because it sits at the spectrum of you can do simple stuff, but you can also do very, very complicated stuff that, really gives you powerful features and capabilities to connect different models, to use local models, to use cloud source models, all sorts of stuff. So I want to do these three things, and I think that it it does a good job at showing the entire timeline, the, let's say, complexity spectrum of building agents. Okay, so I already set up this notebook, so I'm gonna just walk through the code line by line, and let's see how to get that going. So first things first is just we're going to be calling the, I would be loading my .env file here with OpenAI. So, and that just makes sure that we have the access to the OpenAI API key. Um, and then we're going to set up some imports. First, we're going to set up the call to the OpenAI API. So if I just come here, as you can see, I'm just testing the call to the OpenAI API, and I'm using the 16K GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K version. And I have this very simple systems prompt, and then I say create a simple task of 3 desktop things that I can do on the terminal. And that's going to be relevant for the next cells. And if I run this, we test that the calling actually works. So as you can see, I formatted this as Markdown, and the output from the model was indeed 3 tasks that you can do on the terminal. So this is awesome. So um, that should give us a segue into the types of actions I would like to perform. So what I want to do is I want to connect a large language model like ChatGPT. In this case, we're going to use the OpenAI API with some functions, some Python functions that I'm going to write myself, right? Are actually already written, so we're just going to walk through them. And we're going to try to connect these two in a way that allows the model to make a decision about calling a function and all the way up to actually calling that function. We're going to see what's the path from one thing to the other, okay? And what are the challenges, etc. So um, I'm going to create 3 functions. One that creates a directory in the current directory. In this case, this is a silly function that just creates the same directory called test. Then I'm going to create another one that's called create file, and that will just create a text.txt file inside the current directory. And then another one that's called list files that just lists the files in the current directory, right? So now that we have these 3, I'm going to run this. We can test them out. So I can say ls using the exclamation point so that we see how the ls command usually works, and then I can create a directory and then run ls again. And as you can see, a folder called test was created. It didn't exist before. And there's a test dir folder here, which I had created a little bit before when I was practicing for this presentation. And now I'm going to create a file. This is going to create the test.txt file. And as you can see, the file gets created here. And finally, I'm going to list the files. And this is all just to test the functions that I wrote. Now, this idea of connecting these models with tools is not new, obviously. And I think that the earlier paper that I know about this is this Toolformer paper, which I definitely recommend you check it out. Essentially, is one of the papers that I think was one of the papers that discussed this idea. It came out at the beginning of this year, and it was about how language models can teach themselves to reuse these tools. So yeah, definitely awesome paper to check it out. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to write a class that that puts everything together to organize, to be a little bit more neat. You don't have to do it like this. It's just a simple way to put all these different things and functionalities together. So it's going to have an init. I probably should be doing this a little bit better, but I don't care. So it's going to have an init, and then it's going to have a function to call the OpenAI API. And then it will have also the functions that we want to add to the model. Okay, so these are the functions. And that's pretty much it. So now that we have these, we can actually put everything together so that when a model is given a task, the model should be able to plan the task, execute actions to complete the task, and have the ability to know when to call a function and actually call that function, right? So, so now what I'm doing here is I just changed the functions to output actually just to I made these functions useful, right? So the function now creates an actual directory, and this function actually creates a file that's given by the user, and this function just lists the files inside the current folder. Now I can set up the model, and then I can give a task like create a folder called Lucas, the agent master, because my sense of humor is amazing. And inside that folder, create a file called the 10 master rules, and it's a markdown file, right? And now we can make a call to the model, and we can say get response, and then I will give the task description to the model, but pay attention to the prompt that I'm using here. I'm saying, given this task, consider you have access to the following functions, and now I show the model the functions that it has access to. So these are the functions that it has access to. These are the functions in this class here, right, that we just discussed. And I say your output should be the first function to be executed to complete the task containing the necessary arguments. And the output should only be the Python function call and nothing else. Now, I know what you're thinking. If we have a task that involves multiple function calls, this is not going to work, right? This is just the first one. But what I want is just to see if we can get the model to output just the function called correctly. So let's see if that's possible. I will run this, and there we go. As you can see, the first action would be to create a directory called Lucas the agent master. I am the agent master after all, so you know. And awesome. Now what we want is to get this output and somehow give the model the ability to execute as well. So what are we going to do? Well, we can use this amazing little Python built-in functionality called exec. And then all we have to do is, since I created a variable here called model that's an that instantiates the model with tools class, you don't have to do it like this. I just did it like this. I don't know why I did it like this. Whatever. I wanted to have everything inside a class, even though I'm putting inside the prompt. This is just, it's not like I did amazing planning here, but we can call this plus the output, and this should form, if we get it correctly, the call to the function, and exec takes care of executing it for us. So we can execute this. Now we can come here and we can say, wait, there we go. So now I can see that inside the current folder, there's a folder called Lucas the Agent Master. Now that I say that out loud many times, I feel quite ridiculous that I'm putting this on YouTube, but whatever. And there we go. We use Python built-in method exec connected with a function call that was given by the output of the large language model. And we didn't have to do any kind of fancy stuff. It was just using the calls to the model themselves, which I think is pretty neat because, you see that this stuff is possible, and these frameworks that are coming out, they build on top of capabilities like this, right? So now what are we doing here? Now what I'm doing, I actually have to remember because I prepared this notebook yesterday. Oh yeah, now I improved the prompt engineering. Don't worry, we're gonna walk through everything. So this is all the stuff that we had before, right? So we have all the functions that match the capabilities we want the model to have, right? So listing files, creating directories, etc. Also calling the get response, also calling the OpenAI API call. I put everything inside a class because I want to have everything kind of combined. However, I added a function here called execute function call, which will take in a function call string, just like we did with the create directory function call, and it will execute the function call, right? So now I can say, okay, so I want this model. I will say, I will describe a very simple, silly task like create a folder called Lucas the Agent Master. Let's actually change this to create a folder called Lucas the unoriginal Joker. There we go. Much, much more accurate depiction of my qualities. And now I'm gonna write a little prompt, and in the prompt I'm gonna say, given a task that will be fed as input, consider that you have access to these functions, right? These are the functions. Your output should be the first function to be executed to complete the task, containing the necessary arguments. For example, task, create a folder name, Lucas the Agent Master, output, model.create, Lucas the Agent Master. So I'm just teaching it to actually add the model dot after the thing. It's not exactly like the most intelligent way to do this, but don't worry, we'll evolve this as we go. And I give some examples. So I'm doing a little bit of something called few-shot learning. So few-shot learning is nothing more than to give to the model examples of input and output pairs so that the model learns how the user wants the output structured, okay? And then at the end, I say the output should only be the Python function call and nothing else. And then I give the task and I ask the model. So this is called priming. I'm priming the model to give the output just as I want it by giving the output, the column, and skipping a line. And now if I call this, there we go. We get the correct function call. And now I can call the model.execute function call on this output. And if I come here and I list the files using that capability, there we go. As you can see, Lucas the unoriginal Joker is right there. Now, this is kind of convoluted way, and I could have done it in like a simpler way. So don't worry about, you don't have to have the model dot. And this is supposed to be a bit kind of fuzzy right now because we're going to evolve this, right? This is just I think that this is the first iteration of how I try to solve this particular problem of having these function calls inside the prompt. And I think it's cool because it shows you that you can have that ability for free. You don't even need any frameworks to start doing function calling, right? But if you want to do more complex, interesting stuff, then maybe, if you want to have multiple tools, if you want to have complex tools, maybe it will be interesting to add in some stuff, and we're going to see what we're going to add in and how. So we connected the model to the tools, right? So this is awesome, but we want the ability to perform multiple actions, right? Not just the first function call to solve the problem, etc. So we just showed that we can do the function calls, right? And that the model can properly organize that function call because it will understand how that function works, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the prompt so that the output is not just one function call, but a list with all the function calls that would solve the problem programmatically, step by step. However, we are assuming here that the problem itself can be solved by just stringing together function calls, which is not necessarily true, but we're going, step by step. So what are we setting up here? Let's go line by line. I'm setting up the model again. I'm setting up a task description. And again, I'm going to change this task description because the name is ridiculous. So I'm going to say Lucas, the very unoriginal Joker. And inside the folder, create a file called the 10 unoriginal rules of comedy. All right. So this task is going to be very easy. It's just create a folder, and then inside that folder, create a file called whatever. Okay. And we're going to say, okay, the output, we ask the model, we say, given a task, you have access to these functions, just like we did before. Your output should be a list of function calls to be executed to complete this task containing the necessary arguments, right? So we want to see if the model can organize the list with all the proper function calls, which when executed one after the other will solve our problem, right? And of course, we are giving very simple tasks, but we'll get there. And then I give a little bit of, I do a little bit of few shot learning. So I give it a little bit of a few examples. So create a folder and create a file. And then I give an example with multiple calls. So I say create a folder, and then inside the folder, create a file. And then there we go. These are the outputs, right? So the output should only be a Python list with function calls inside and nothing else. So the task is this, and then the output is this. And then I call this, and there we go. We get the correct function calls inside the list, which is awesome because I'm running this right now and with actually different inputs. So it's nice to see that it still works because I did this yesterday and it worked perfectly, but it could have failed now, even though I am rerunning the same kind of the same script with like slight changes. So again, I'm going to call the execute function call on this output from the model, and we can test it out. We can say, now I have to change the name to the name of the folder I created, which is Lucas the very unoriginal Joker. So I can come here and I can say this, and there we go. We have that file created there. So it's working. It's awesome. I love it. So all we had to do is use this and it worked. So hopefully you start identifying some issues that I outline here on this notebook. And don't worry, I will make this notebook available to anyone that wants to take a look. And there's some issues, right? And the issues are kind of obvious. So this works for very simple examples, but as we scale in complexity of the functions, complexity of the tasks, we have a certain uncertainty about the model's outputs, which can affect our ability to reliably call the functions, right? If the model gives us anything beyond just the function call, we're going to fail. So we don't have any kind of security about if the model is going to be able to call the function or not. In these examples, I did very simple toy examples, but for more complex problems, we would reach a bottleneck. We will reach a threshold in terms of complexity and difficulty quite fast. So we need a structured way to prepare inputs for the function calls, and we need better ways to put everything together, right? Because just feeding entire functions makes it for a very clunky, non-scalable framework, and not to mention the fact that we have limit context lengths. There's a bunch of issues, right? So just putting a bunch of Python functions or whatever code inside the prompt is probably suboptimal, right? So that's where OpenAI functions comes in, because OpenAI functions, they try not to solve these problems, but they try to solve the problem of connecting tools to LLMs, okay? And if we go to the function calling API to learn how this thing works under the hood, let's say, we we learn quite quickly that you can describe functions and have the model intelligently choose to output a JSON object. This is what it does, right? And you can use that for a bunch of stuff like creating assistants that answer questions by calling external APIs. You can convert natural language into API calls, which is essentially what we were doing there before. And you can extract structured data from text. You can do all sorts of amazing things. And all you have to do is call the model with a query in a set of functions, which will be defined in something called a functions parameter. You can choose to call one or more, and if so, the content will be string defined to a JSON object adhering to your custom schema. And the model may hallucinate parameters, but hopefully it won't if we take care of some precautions. And then we'll parse the string into a JSON. So this is the jump we're doing. Before we were working only on strings, and now we're going to be working on JSON. And we'll call the model by appending the function response as a new message and let the model summarize the results back to the user. Now, what I would like to do is come here on the function calling explanation, and what I would like to do, yeah. So essential idea, the essential idea with function calling is to give the model ability to call functions, right? And using JSON is a good way to structure the inputs to the function that we explain to the model how that function works, right? The function, so that the model has a way, so we have a way to control for the uncertainties associated with just working with, functions inside of a prompt, inside of a string, etc. So if that's confused you, don't worry, let's take a look at an example. So this is the official example from the documentation. I'm just going to walk through it very fast because I actually have my own example with this, following along with this create directory stuff that we were doing. So essentially here we have a function that gets the current weather, and this is a toy example function that, depending on the a location input that this function takes from the user, which will be just a string, um, it will check if it's Tokyo, San Francisco, or Paris, and it will return a JSON dump with this dictionary where location is the key and the value is, Tokyo, and temperature something with some unit, and that's it. So it will return a dictionary with 3 keys: location, temperature, and unit. As you can see here, location, temperature, unit. This is just a toy example to demonstrate how OpenAI function calling works. And then you can write a function called run conversation, and this is a list of messages from the user, and in this case we just have one message from the user, and the message is, what's the weather like in San Francisco, Tokyo, and Paris? So as you can see, uh, this involves multiple functions to that same function, right? Multiple calls to that same function. And then you create a list called tools. And inside this list, you give it a dictionary with some information about the function that you want the model to learn how to call, okay? And what's going on here, we're going to say, okay, so the function is called get current weather, and you describe what the function does. So it gets the current weather in a given location. You you explain the parameters by saying the type is object, the properties are location, and then you explain what the properties are. So you say that's a string and what the property is. Same thing for unit, okay? And you don't have to explain them all. Actually, you don't have to explain them all, no. So these are the explanations for the parameters of the function, right? So obviously you have to explain them all. And then you can set the required key of this dictionary, which just says that the only required input for that function is the location. You don't necessarily have to input the unit. And then finally, you say you create a different type of OpenAI function call, which you add here, as you can see below the messages. You add the tools, and you say that the tool choice is automatic, right? Which is default, but we're just putting in here so that you can see. And you will get the output from the model by calling it like this. Response message is the choices, 0.message. This just access the output from the model. And then you check if there are two calls inside of that output, okay? And if they are, so we check in if the model decided to call any tool, you will see what are the available functions. So in this case, the available function is get current weather, which is a dictionary with the key get current weather, and then the value is the name of the function that we define here outside, right? And then we say, okay, so messages that append, you append the response message, which is the entire response from the model. And then you loop over the to call, because that's going to be a list. And you say, okay, so what is the function name? What is the function to call? So you access the available functions dictionary. You give it the function name, which should give which should give you the access by the key, as you can see here. And then you get the arguments by calling JSON load on the arguments attribute of the toCall.function, okay? And then you get the response from that function call by saying function response is equal to function to call, and then you do this. And then you append to the messages list information about the call to the function. And there you have it. And this is just, you can go on with this and extend the conversation, and you can do all sorts of stuff with this type of, this is just a template structure that you can evolve on. But this is essentially how you would call functions using the OpenAI API. And here I just ran an example for you folks to see. And we can take a look that the contents were, as you can see, it called the function. So the temperature is this, in Tokyo temperature is that, etc., etc. So there you have it. You were able to call that function effectively, thanks to um, thanks to this little setup. Now, this is all great, wonderful, marvelous. We can inspect the output that we got so that we can see just the string. And now we can take this approach and we can take the stuff that we were doing before, but of like putting all the functions inside of the string, etc. And we can say, okay, now let's do that with OpenAI function calling. Now that we know how kind of OpenAI function calling works, more or less, let's see how our previous agent that was not using OpenAI function calling would work with this approach. So what I'm doing here is just I'm setting it up in the proper way for OpenAI function calling. So what I'm doing is I have a function, create directory, and all that I had to do was just to give it an output to return when I call the function, because before I was just creating the directory, but now I'm saying json.dump and it will just return the directory name. And I'm just going to do with one function, which is the create directory, just to simplify things a little bit. Or maybe because I got bored and lazy yesterday. It could be one thing or the other. So we're just using one function, create directory, okay? So I'm going to say the type function. I'm going to create the function key here inside of this dictionary, which is the tool. And then I will give the name of the function. I'll give a description of what the function does, and I'll describe the properties as a dictionary with the type, the properties key, inside of which I will give the inputs to that function. In this case, it's just the directory name, the type of data type, which is the string, a description of the property. Directory name indicates the name of the directory that we're going to create with that function. And we're going to say what is required. In this case, the directory name is the required argument. And now we're going to put that inside of a list, and that's our tools. Now that we have that, we set up a run function, just like we did the run conversation. I'm calling this the run terminal task. And what I did was there's a messages variable right here. And in it, I give the role, which is the user, and the content, which is the message. This is replacing our test description stuff, our prompt that we were doing before. And now all we have to do is give the task, right? We don't have to set up all of that other stuff that was kind of like indicating the model that it should call the functions. Now, all of that is being done for us right now. And I said create a folder called Lucas the Agent Master. Let's again change that to Lucas the Super Unoriginal Joker. All right. So this is our simple task, and we're going to test to see if we can successfully call the function. I'm going to give the tools, and the tools is just a list with the tool create directory. If you don't remember what that variable is, the variable is just this dictionary that we have right here to create directory. I actually set that thing twice, which was silly. I can just delete this. And we set up the response from the model, and we give the tools here. We set the tool choice to automatic, even though auto is the default. I'm putting it here because in the OpenAI documentation, they put it there as well. So now I get the output. I check if there are tool calls. If there are, I set the available functions dictionary. I append the response message to the messages list. I loop over the tool calls. In this case, there's just one. There will be just one, right? Because the task was just to create a directory. And then I'll get the function name, the function to call, the arguments, and this is my calling of the function, right? I append the response to the messages list because that's storing the history of our conversation with the model. And then here is the second response variable, which is just an indication that we could extend this to continue the conversation, right? Today there are like easier ways to set up this kind of loop, and we'll see a little bit about that in a second with LangChain. And there we can just run this, and we can see what happens. Okay, so we have an output. Let's the folder called ta has been created, so we know that, and we can come here and I can say ls, and we can see that the Lucas the Super Unoriginal Joker is a folder that was created. So we successfully called that function using OpenAI function calling. So that's great. That's awesome. That's amazing. That's beautiful. That's just OpenAI function calling is awesome. And there's probably a lot of people there saying if you know a little bit about this, you're probably going to be like, but how about Pydantic, and this is like a next level of control that we can have. But I find very educational to teach it like this, to like talk about it like this, because we can organize this discussion about agents in terms of layers of complexity and what problems we are solving, right? Because when we get here, we can ask ourselves, okay, so this was quite a lot of setup, right? To just give action, to just give like access to a model. We had to set up a loop and organize how the tool calling is done, right? And at least I find this kind of like a loop that looks a bit, it's we're thinking about a lot of stuff, right? So this is where I think LangChain can be interesting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a similar approach with LangChain, and let's see what kind of benefits we can get, right? So first of all, I set up the imports. So let's go through them. This is the, from LangChain.tools, I'm going to import tool, which I will use as a decorator to transform a regular Python function into a tool that an agent can call. Then I'm going to set up access to a OpenAI API, OpenAI model using the chat OpenAI class from LangChain. Then I'm going to set up an executor, which will take care of the runtime of the agent. We'll see what that is in a second. And then I'll set up some prompt templates, which will take care of abstracting away some stuff from the prompt that you write to the model. And then we're going to use the format tool to OpenAI function, which is something that turns a tool from LangChain to an OpenAI function, which can be useful because LangChain makes it interchangeable. You can set up tools in LangChain, you can set up tools in OpenAI function, and you can just call this to go from one to the other, to go from tool to OpenAI function. And OpenAI functions are great, as we just saw. Same thing to format messages of the agent to OpenAI function messages. And finally, we're going to set up an output parser. Remember, an output parser is something that cleans up the output of an LLM, and we're gonna parse it as an OpenAI function output. Okay, and we'll see what that means. So now I'm gonna put that. Just again, I'm gonna create a tools variable, and I'm gonna put our function inside of a list. And as you can see, I put the name of the actual function because this decorator is taking care of transforming this function into a Python, into a tool. Now I'm going to initialize my model with temperature 0 because I want a model that's very precise. I'm going to create a prompt template, and what the prompt template is doing is I have a system message that just says something general like you're a powerful assistant that helps users perform tasks in the terminal. So I made it a little bit specific. And then this prompt template will take as input the input from the user, and everything will go into the this user value. Okay, so we won't be adding anything new. And in here we have a messages placeholder, and in this messages placeholder that will take in the agent scratchpad, which if you remember before we were appending stuff to a messages list, and this will take care of that process of appending messages to as we go. Let's imagine you go through a loop of actions with this agent, and the intermediate steps will be stored here. Now, we're going to bind the model with the tool by calling the bind method on the LLM model that we initialized. And then we're going to say functions equal a list. And then we're going to call format the tool to OpenAI function, which is cool because now this is a simple way to set up a tool. And then we can just call one function to format it into OpenAI functions. We could use it just with LangChain, but we can also go from LangChain to OpenAI functions, which I find is very nice because OpenAI functions are powerful. Finally, we're going to create an agent. And an agent initially here will be a tuple containing a dictionary that has a description of what's going on with the inputs as they come to the agent, right? So the input, remember the input is called input because it's the variable defined in the chat prompt template, all right? And this lambda method function here will just pass the input along, okay? Now, because the input to this agent will be a dictionary, so we're accessing the input key in that dictionary. Finally, the agent scratchpad, remember, agent scratchpad right here, it's the variable in the messages placeholder for the chat prompt template. And we're going to format everything that comes in to OpenAI function messages. And we're going to call intermediate steps. And intermediate steps is nothing more than just a reference to the steps between the moment an agent gets an input to the moment the agent gives an output. Finally, we're going to use the pipe symbol, which is LangChain's LCEL interface, which is LangChain Expression Language Interface, which is a powerful way to combine agents with prompts, with models, with output parsing, to create awesome pipelines in a simple way, because you just have to use this pipe symbol to connect stuff together. Okay, and stuff in this case is like the model with the prompt with the output parsing. So I'm saying, okay, I have an agent that does this to the input, and then I'll connect that with the prompt, and then with the LLM that has the tools that were binded to the LLM, and then I will parse that using the OpenAI function agent output parser, which is one of many output parsers in LangChain. And now I'm going to put everything inside something called an agent executor, because before in LangChain you can set up and control the runtime of the agent. However, that can be a bit tricky and annoying. You have to write a while loop. So agent executor takes care of error handling and error handling and a bunch of other stuff. Error handling and a bunch of other stuff, so that your agent just runs smoothly. And inside this agent executor class, we give the agent, we give the tools, and we set verbose to true so that we can visualize what's going on as the agent solves your task. Now we're going to give an input to the agent, and that's going to be our task description. So I'm going to say Lucas the random joker. This is going to be the task for the model. And let me just put that again. And then we're going to invoke that, and we're going to give that to the input, so that that gets passed along to the agent and goes through the pipeline. So I'm going to say random joker again. And if I run this, there we go, create a directory. Beautiful. So if I come here, I say ls -d, we can see that the folder was created successfully. Now, we could add many more functions here by just creating, some other function. And then all we would have to do is come here, say, add the decorator tool, add that to the tools list, and that's it. We just added another functionality to our agent that we could use to do other things, right? Which I think is awesome because, I mean, imagine, for example, let's do something right now, all right? Let's do something a bit unscripted. So I'm going to say create file, and this will take me in a file path, and this will use sub process. Yeah, and we're going to have to add a documentation, a little description of what the function does in order for this thing to work. We're going to say function that creates a file given a file path. Perfect. And I don't have to say this. I don't have to, because this is just for the OpenAI function stuff. So although I'm not sure. So let's return the JSON dump. Yeah, so we're going to say return this, and this is going to be the file path, and then file path. Okay, great. And instead of some other function, I'm going to say create file. Okay, so now let's change the task, so that instead of being something very simple like create a folder called this, we're going to add something. We're going to say create a folder called Lucas the Random Joker 2, and create a file inside this folder called the 10 random rules of comedy. All right, so let's see if that works. We're testing it right now. Let's take a look. All right, perfect. So now we can see that the folder was created. So let's now say ls Lucas the random joker 2, and our file was created. Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, folks, that's it. In this video, we kind of work through a very silly and naive way to define an agent by just putting functions inside of a prompt string, right? And I didn't do this in the most optimized way possible, but this was just to explain kind of like a concept, right? The concept is if you put functions inside of a prompt and you show it to a model, the model can understand how to call them, and it can understand how to structure a problem as a list of steps where each step is a potential function call. And I use these terminal tasks, terminal actions as examples because they're simple to understand as tools for an agent, right? And then we saw how OpenAI functions is a way to make the model better at calling functions and structuring inputs to functions, where you can just have to give it JSON schema with an explanation of what that function does and the properties and the parameters, and the model takes care of structuring the proper input to that function given some problem that you give it. And then we showed how to organize that for our simple create directory tool, but we could have added whatever we wanted. And then we set up a similar loop to do that OpenAI function calling. And finally, we used LangChain to create tools and to create an agent by leveraging the tool decorator connected with the format to OpenAI function. And then we put everything into, um, this is called a runnable. Let me just put, if we come here and say type agent, yeah, this is a runnable sequence. Now, runnables are these building blocks in LangChain that allow you to build components, chains, stuff like that, right? And this is a runnable because it's built with the LCL interface, which we learn is LangChain's way to compose, let's say, building blocks that leverage prompts, large language models, function output function parsing, agents, etc., to build interesting stuff. And we organize it in a way where we bind the model with the tools. And then when we ask the agent to perform one or more actions, the agent properly calls the functions just like we want it. And if we want to add on functions and functionality here, we don't have to be writing any JSON schemas or anything like that. That's taken care for us by LangChain. We can just come here, say tool, and come here and say something like some other function, and we could just add it to the list of tools and we can use it. So I like LangChain a lot. There are many other frameworks that we could have used. Maybe we'll explore some of those in the future. I definitely want to do more videos about how to build complex research assistants, learning assistant, personal assistant, reporting agents, all sorts of stuff, either using OpenAI Assistance API or LangChain or AutoGen, or maybe I'll take a look at TaskWeaver. Let me know in the comments what kind of frameworks you're interested in. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time. Cheers.